Timestamps are along the bottom. During the intro, we'll have some footage in the background. During the guide, we'll have a slideshow and screenshots. Full gameplay showcase will be at the end. Welcome to Barrier Invocation Infernalist. This build has been gaining popularity recently. It seems like it's been simultaneously invented from quite a few angles, so I figured I'd share the version I'm doing. So story time for the build is that someone early on in the beta posted a video using a high-level curse to deal a ton of damage to themselves using Infernal Flame. They'd then take that damage to a hybrid life and ES pool to get Invocation energy. They'd recover ES with unique gloves and recover life with Recoup as well as their flask. Curses have a high cost and low cast time, so it would fire spells out pretty quickly. It was neat. But my guildmates noticed that the Invoke spell also generated flame and thought, hey, if we can get that cost to be more than our maximum Infernal Flame, and get the damage from Infernal Flame to fill our Invocation energy, that constitutes a spell loop at instant speed, since Invoking is an instant spell. You could do it while dodging, you could cast another spell while invoking. Looked really good, so they tried it out, and wouldn't you know it, it worked. It also killed the fuck out of them in less than a second and crashed them to desktop. Chefs to your stations, it's time to start cooking. At a high level, this build works with a 5-stage engine. In the first stage, we use Barrier Invocation. Barrier Invocation casts socketed spells sequentially, spending energy on each until it is out of energy. Each spell it casts has an Infernal Flame cost, filling our Infernal Flame globe. Once that globe is full, we take fire damage. Taking fire damage to our energy shield gives us energy for Barrier Invocation. To make this engine successfully turn over, we need two things. First, we need to generate enough Eternal Flame from one invocation to fill our globe. Second, we need to take enough damage from Infernal Flame to refill our Barrier Invocation. The entire build hinges on balancing these two. If you don't have enough life and ES and energy gain relative to our fire resistance, you won't refill your Invocation energy. If you don't have enough Infernal Flame cost relative to your Infernal Flame pool, you won't damage yourself often enough. If you damage yourself too much or generate too much excess energy, you're going to have trouble controlling your build. This is effectively a fission reactor. It's an exponential gain. We've got graphite tips, a negative void coefficient, no xenon in sight. Maybe the correct choice is to cancel the test, delete the build. But someone just wrote, press me for gigadam on the scram button. If you do it wrong, you're going to explode. But if you're careful and build properly, you're going to have a lot of power. So I'm going to do my best to walk you through this step by step without consigning myself to helping people put numbers into a calculator one by one. I'm sure by the end of the week, someone else will have already created a GitHub page or some Google spreadsheet that does half this math for you. I did it by hand and believe you have the ability to do the same. There is no perfect number I can give you for each stat since they're all intertwined and setup dependent. As you get more of one stat, you're going to need more or less of another. You're going to have to crunch some numbers with me. The first thing to note is that we want as little life as possible. That means avoiding the act rewards. It means equipping Ghost Wraith as well as at least one Ming's Heart. You're going to want them corrupted to remove as much life as possible. If you have uncorrupted versions, if you have quest rewards, it's not that bad. You're going to have a worse top end, but it's ultimately okay. I started out with the uncorrupted versions and, didn't have as many demon form stacks, but we're based on recoup instead of regen, so it doesn't matter that much. You're going to finish the map before you cap out either way. The next important puzzle piece is collecting 90 max fire res. Figure out how you're going to achieve this. A corrupted belt can give you max fire res. You can get some max res from soul cores. You can get some on the left side of the tree. You can get some on jewels. Pick your poison and plan ahead. Don't call your shot on having +3 max fire res on your belt if you can't actually afford to buy such a belt. Next, you pick what spell you want to be invoking. I'm using Arc. I've seen Spark, Comet, Eye of Winter, and Fireball all do good work too. You can pretty much pick any non-channeling spell and it'll pump out damage. The only thing that doesn't work right now is Lightning Warp because it crashes the game. Hopefully GGG fixes that because I do think that invoking Lightning Warp sounds like a lot of fun. We pick here because it determines a bit of our pathing on tree and gives us numbers for our cost calculations later down the line. As an example for the calculations, I'm going to be demonstrating how this works using Arc since that's what I'm currently playing, and Spark since I'm familiar with it and it's the most OP spell option right now. If you're doing some other spell, try to keep up and follow the general idea with the relevant choices that you're using for your spell. Arc first. I intend to support it with Lightning Mastery, Chain, Conduction, and Overcharge, using a level 19 Uncut skill gem and a +1 Corruption that gives me an Infernal Flame cost of 340. We expect to have at least 800 max flame thanks to our intelligence, and plan to avoid mana on gear to stay below 1000. This means that in order to fulfill our maximum globe, we must cast Arc at least 3 times. As a note, spells come sequentially and do not interrupt Flame's decaying. As such, it's not safe to hit the max mana exactly. You need to generate slightly more flame than your maximum. Still, for us, 3 casts. Arc has a base cast time of 1.1 seconds and no added cast time. It will cost 110 energy to invoke. In order to cast 3 times, we need 330 energy. We have 66% increased energy gain. Divide 330 by 1.66, round up, and multiply by 5. We need to lose 995 energy shield. We take 100% of our life in ES as fire damage when Infernal Flame procs and have 90% fire resistance. This means we must have our life in ES total summed to at least 9,950. Spark next. We'll want to support it with Lightning Mastery, Persistence, Acceleration, and Lightning Penetration. Using a level 19 Uncut Skill Gem plus 1 Corruption, it gives me an Infernal Flame cost of 338. Again, that means we must cast at least 3 times. Spark has a base cast time of only 0.7 seconds and no added cast time. It will cost 70 energy to invoke. In order to cast 3 times, we need 210 energy. We have 66% increased energy gain. Divide 210 by 1.66, round up, multiply by 5. We need to lose 635 energy shield. We take 100% of our life as fire damage, Infernal Flame procs. We have 9% fire resistance. This means we must have our ES and life total summed to at least 6,350. If we have significantly more energy shield than this, as we likely will, we will spend exponentially more flame each second until we stop invoking or die. Ideally, you take your finger off the DPS button and stop invoking. Realistically, you forget to when you die. To prevent this, don't spend more flame than you can handle and don't get more energy shield than you need. If balanced, you'll still need to take your finger off the button sometimes to prevent exponential growth from getting out of control, but it'll be necessary less often. It'll happen naturally as you take your finger off the trigger between packs. Congrats on doing your first round of math, but you're not quite smarter than a 5th grader yet. You're going to write some of those numbers down. Particularly, you'll want to know your minimum energy shield and your maximum eternal flame. Now you can start planning your passive tree. Take Demon Form and Infernal Flame from your ascendancy. Altered Flesh is very good defensively since you have 90 max fire res. Burning Immolation is good offensively. The pathing looks dumb as hell because we're an Adorned build. We're picking up as many jewel sockets while getting relevant nodes along the way. I've done a decent bit of testing and I'm pretty sure this is optimal. Go up through Witch Start, branch left to get energy shield, branch right and socket a massive controlled metamorphosis to get these 2 notables. Not having the jewel will only cost you 3 extra points on tree, so it's not mandatory, just good to have. Go through the top and branch left and right to get the ES nodes and jewels past them. Next you travel right across the top to get to Eternal Youth. Come down to Monk, branch up and down to get the jewel sockets, go further down, get the jewel sockets via Acrobatics, go further south, grab the 3 Ranger jewel sockets, finally get the 2 jewel sockets between Ranger and Mercenary, pick up Oasis. Now we start filling all of our sockets with jewels. One is going to need to be adorned with at least 50%, and as mentioned before, one of them is going to be controlled metamorphosis. All the rest will need to be magic jewels that we've corrupted. 5 will be ruby jewels with plus 2 max fire res. The rest will be a mix of emeralds, with flask duration and life flask recovery. They'll need to be corrupted to work with adorned. The best corruption enchants are going to be in resistances. Having 1 or 2 attribute corruptions is helpful as well. The other stats you want depend on the build. For Spark, you're going to want all projectile speed. As Fireball, you're going to want AoE on your rubies and a little bit of projectile speed on your emeralds. As Comet, AoE on rubies, not really great options on emerald. As Arc, you really don't have any good choices at all, so just get lightning penetration on your emeralds and skip using a curse. Now you customize your tree based on the skill of choice. As Spark, you're going to want to grab these points up here in skill duration. Normally you'd grab some projectile speed, but given how much you're getting on jewels, it's not really worth it to get on tree as well. As Comet, crit around the Monk area is very high value and hard to pass up. You can also pick up this crit notable, which is going to be always active since you'll always be using a flask. Arc doesn't have must-have nodes, so you can fuck around a lot more. These chain nodes at the top are okay, and you're not too far from maximum lightning damage or lucky damage, but ultimately I've chosen not to pick up anything and just go for flask nodes instead. After you've selected your choice damage nodes, if any, you should put the rest of your points into flask nodes and jewel sockets like I've done. That's your tree. Be aware that as you level your character to swap gear, you may need to move some points around. The most important thing is ensuring your Infernal Flame costs and ES total are high enough. If you don't have enough, you'll need to respec a bit of your tree. You can pick up straggler ES nodes to fill that up, and there's some extra ways to get Infernal Flame costs on the top left of the tree as well as anointing stuff in the warrior area. Every time you level, you gain a bit of life in ES, as well as a bit of Infernal Flame. As you get new pieces of gear, it'll change, and in order to counteract that, you'll need to either upgrade your gear, reallocate nodes on tree, or upgrade your gems to increase their cost. It's a balancing act, and you're going to have to maintain balance the entire way through. It's a bit finicky, but you get used to it. and it's not that hard to deal with if we're being honest. Stick to the skeleton, graft limbs here and there as needed, reclaim them when they're not. Now that you have your tree as a skeleton, you can start buying up your gear. Get your Ghost Writhe and Ming's Heart first since they're mandatory anyway. Then buy your flask. Prefix is going to be sapping, it has no downside since we don't have mana anyway, and the upside gives us great recovery. For our suffix, you can pick between reduced charges used or flat charges gained. Flat charges gained is optimal for long-term sustain, such as in boss fights or in the Second trials, while reduced charges used is better for mapping. Percent charges gained is fine as a budget option if the other two are getting price gouged. If you haven't already, now is when you should buy your jewels. Corrupting your own tends to be cheaper than buying pre-corrupted, but messaging people to buy cheap jewels is always a pain, so buying them corrupted might save you time. Remember that you want res on your enchantments if possible, but to start out it's okay if they're lacking. You just have to make up the difference on gear. Next up is the belt, as it is important for the overall comfort of the build with its flask mods. As suffixes, you'll want reduced flask charges used. As prefixes, you want increased life recovery rate. Your implicit should be increased charges gained, reduced charges used, flat charges per second, or life recovery from flasks. Reduced charges used is your best in slot if you have the option, but they're all decent. If you can, you'll want to get resistances and increased charges gained on suffixes too. And as a reminder, belts can corrupt to have maximum fire res. The perfect belt with all these stats is not going to exist. You'll have to weigh your options and pick one to settle on. Next, you should buy your amulet, and this can get kind of expensive, because you need +3 skill gem levels in order to maintain a high eternal flame cost and grant a lot of damage. You'll want at least 5 spirit in order to have herbalism support. If you can't afford to have spirit on your amulet, you can swap to Bedat's Will on your ascendancy tree, but it's better to have the spirit on your amulet, because it's just your implicit. Prefixes can roll flat ES and percent ES, suffixes can roll resistances and crit. Rarity is rarity, get as much as possible. Next, you'll want to get your boots since it tends to be the most expensive piece. Get as much energy shield as possible. Resistances on suffixes are nice to have, but drive the price considerably. Rarity is rarity, get as much movement speed as you can afford. You're probably going to be limited by your budget here, so just crank the numbers up until it's out of your price range. Next, get your helmet since it has the highest ES total. Again, suffixes for rarity and resistances. The more ES you can get here, the more points you can save on your passive tree. Gloves are the same story as the helmet, but the ES totals are going to be lower, and they're going to be cheaper. Look to give up a bit of your energy shield in order to get better resistances. Finally, you buy your ring. You buy this last since the only real stat on it is going to be the resistances. You'll want to cap all your elemental resistances and overcap your fire resistance to 105 to avoid elemental weakness. Chaos damage deals double damage to ES, so getting that up is good too, but you shouldn't need much of it given that you're wearing a Ming's Heart, Ghost Rise, and can get 10 from the campaign quest. With how little all the other stats matter, it should be easy to get a ring like mine with a fuck ton of resistances and rarity. Being in demon form all the time, we don't need to worry about a weapon or offhand. Feel free to equip something defensive just in case you pop out of demon form in a bad spot, but realistically that's not going to happen, so just wear nothing and walk around with your fists like a badass. Attribute-wise, you're looking for 209 int, 133 dex. Your travel nodes don't quite get you all the way there, so you'll need some on jewel corruptions. If you don't have jewel corruptions, you've got big attribute notables nearby that you can pick up to make up the difference. If you can't hit these totals, don't worry too much. Without the dex, you won't be able to reserve Alchemist Boon. But you don't need that while mapping anyway, since your charges will come back from kills. Without the intelligence, you won't be able to equip level 20 gems, but if you're struggling to get your intelligence, then you shouldn't be buying level 20 gems anyway. For sockets on gear, capping resistances has the highest priority, obviously, and getting enough energy shield to sustain your loop. Then, you pick up rarity. Rarity is rarity. Onto your gem setup. In your Barrier Invocation, you want whatever gem setup you planned on before. Remember that the skill gem placed in it does not need to have sockets, so getting 20 quality and +1 gem level shouldn't be too expensive. Eye of Winter with Unleash is an easy way to apply critical weakness to enemies. I support mine with Withering Touch since Ming's Heart gives us a little bit of chaos damage. Arcane Tempo makes it feel a little bit better to cast, and I think Deceleration makes it easier to land on bosses. As an Arc player, I have almost full elemental penetration, so Temporal Chains is my course of choice. If you are playing another skill, you're going to want to have a relevant elemental curse here to strip resistances away. You may also consider adding a way to apply shock and exposure, like Frostbomb and Lightning Orb. I use the second arc in my gem list to hold some supports I might want for a gem swap, like Supercritical in place of Chain, for sparse maps or bosses. Alchemist Boon with Herbalism support rounds out our Spirit Reservation with useful stats. Demon Form gets an extra cooldown as well as cooldown recovery rate. This lets us move around even when we're not properly sustaining our life, such as within the Second trials or when we're backtracking through maps. Map mod-wise, we want to avoid minus max and less recovery like the Plague. Those two can and will obliterate the build. You'll show up, try to invoke, and go right back to hideout. We overcap our fire res, so elemental weakness maps are no sweat. If you're not overcapped, you'll need to avoid those two. Remember that rituals can also put elemental weakness on the ground, so be wary of them if you're not overcapped. Reduced flask charges gained is additive with increased charges gained, so that mod isn't as detrimental as it may initially seem. We can run it with no problem. Sharked ground will require you to play with eyes slightly more open as you'll take extra damage, but isn't a death sentence or anything the same way minus max is. That's the build. I fully expect it to get nerfed, buyer beware. Enjoy some laggy and loud gameplay footage.